Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the most famous names in history, synonymous with military brilliance and ruthless ambition. But who was he really? What was his childhood like? How did he come to power, and what were the key events that shaped his rise and fall? And finally, how did this Corsican upstart die? Well, let's find out. So Napoleon was born on August 15, 1769 in the city of Ajaccio, on the Mediterranean island of Corsica. It was at this time a relatively new part of France, having been taken from the Republic of Pisa in 1755. His father, Carlo, was of modest origins, a lawyer who served as an official in the royal courts of Tuscany and then in Corsica, while his mother, Maria, was the daughter of a wealthy landowner. The family lived in relative comfort, but not in luxury, in a house on a side street. Little Napoleon was the second-born, the first son, Luciano, having been born 2 years earlier. There were 7 children in total, 2 of which died in infancy. From the age of 6, Napoleon was sent to mainland France for education, first to a primary school run by the Christian Brothers in the city of Bastia, the capital of Corsica, and then at the age of 10 to a lycée in the city of Autun. He proved to be an intelligent student, particularly excelling in mathematics and in artillery, an interest he would retain throughout his life. In fact, it was his proficiency in this subject that saved him from humiliation during a school trip to Paris. When he was 12, he entered the prestigious military school at Brienne, which was renowned for its excellence in artillery. However, he found it hard to fit in here. He was short for his age, being just 4 feet, 11 inches or 1.49 meters tall. Also, he had a Corsican accent and was seen as something of a provincial outsider. Nonetheless, he excelled in his studies, graduating top of his class in 1784. At this point, he was given the choice of which branch of the army he wanted to join, and he chose artillery. He was sent to France's prestigious military academy at Paris, where he graduated in 1785 and was appointed as a second lieutenant in the artillery. At this stage, he was still a very unknown figure, going largely unnoticed, even though he had been close to Louis XVI on several occasions, including when they both attended the king's wedding to Marie Antoinette in 1770. Corsica at this time was still seen as rather remote and backward, and Napoleon was sometimes taunted by his fellow officers about being a savage from a distant island. So Napoleon initially struggled to make his mark, made worse by the fact that he was poor and couldn't afford to buy the fine clothes that were de rigueur among the French military elite. Nevertheless, in 1789, he became an artillery instructor at the Royal Military School in Chantelle, where he would stay for the next few years. It was here that he read the works of the Enlightenment philosophers, such as Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau, whose ideas so influenced his thinking that he began to subscribe to the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. When news arrived of the storming of the Bastille in Paris, he and some of his fellow officers celebrated, seeing in it a victory for the ideas of liberty against the absolutist pretensions of the monarchy. However, he also recognized the chaos that had descended upon the capital. He wrote to his brother Joseph Bonaparte, "Paris is in a state of complete anarchy. Citizens roam the streets with arms in their hands and talk of a republic. I am sorry to say it, but the thing is going badly." In 1792, the war between France and the Habsburgs was intensifying, and Napoleon was given command of a company of artillery and sent to the front. He distinguished himself greatly at the Battle of the Freiburg in Switzerland, helping the French to capture several strategic pieces of high ground. On one occasion, he single-handedly captured an enemy cannon, having noticed that it was unmanned. Soon after, he was promoted to chef de bataillon, a rank equivalent to captain. In September 1793, following the fall of the Girondins, the radical Jacobins seized power in Paris and set about instituting the ideals of the French Revolution across France. They introduced the law of 22 prairial, which allowed for the summary execution of those suspected of counter-revolutionary activity without the need for trial. Under this law, many aristocrats lost their heads, including Marie Antoinette, who was guillotined on October 1793. Napoleon was initially suspicious of the Jacobins and their leader, Maximilien Robespierre, whom he saw as a rival in the pursuit of power. He said of Robespierre, "He is ambitious, but he lacks energy. He would have been less dangerous if he had more ability." Nevertheless, he was aware that the Jacobins could be useful in advancing his own career. So he ingratiated himself with them and benefited from the opportunities that were now presenting themselves. For example, he rose rapidly through the ranks, becoming a general of brigade in November 1793 and general of division in 1794, as well as being elected as a deputy for the Department of the Low Countries to the National Convention, a position he never took up. However, with Robespierre's star on the wane, Napoleon decided to distance himself from the Jacobins and instead threw himself into his work, in particular devising new artillery pieces that would help turn the tide of the war in France his favor. This he did brilliantly, playing a crucial role in several battles, including the Battle of Jemappes in 1792 and the Battle of Fleurus in 1794. By this time, he was a celebrity in France, his name being invoked by ardent Republicans as well as royalist supporters of the deposed Bourbon dynasty. With the war seemingly going well, there was little appetite in France for peace, at least until the Thermidorian reaction of 1794, when the radical Jacobins lost power and a more moderate government led by the Directory came to prominence. The new government was keen to end the war and so sought peace with the Habsburgs, signing the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797. Under the treaty, France acquired vast territories in the Low Countries, as well as Austrian possessions in northern Italy. For Napoleon, this was a great disappointment, and he made his feelings known. It didn't help that he had recently fallen in love with Josephine de Beauharnais, a beautiful and sophisticated woman twice his age who was married to one of his superiors, General Alexandre de Beauharnais. Unfortunately for Napoleon, his advances towards her were spurned, as she was unwilling to leave her husband. Not one to take no for an answer, he engineered the death of her husband in the Egyptian campaign, after which Josephine and Napoleon were soon wed. This was a shrewd move on his part, as Josephine brought with her a large dowry and so helped to establish Napoleon and his new wife in Paris society. Moreover, it gained him the favor of her influential mother, Madame de Tachet de la Pagerie, who became a kind of unofficial second mother to his son, Napoleon II. In 1799, the Directory was faltering badly, and there was much discontent over the way the war with Austria had been conducted. In these circumstances, Napoleon returned to France from his post in Egypt and seized power in a coup d'état, establishing the consulate, a new form of government in which he was first consul. He quickly consolidated his power, suppressing several revolts, executing those he suspected of disloyalty, such as the Duc d'Enghien, and generally silencing opposition. At the same time, he began introducing many reforms, including the establishment of the Bank of France, a new legal code, and a reorganization of local government. He also ended the revolutionary excesses, such as the sans-culottes and the Committee of Public Safety, which had become so feared. Instead, he reintroduced order and discipline, famously saying, "I came to reorganize, not to destroy." Many of these reforms were popular, and he had widespread support among the people, as well as among the army, which he had done so much to enhance. As for his enemies, well, he kept them on side through a policy of bribery, notably bribing members of the royal family with generous pensions, keeping them dependent on him. In 1802, he concluded a peace treaty with the British, ending hostilities between the two countries. However, he continued to expand French territory, conquering northern Italy, as well as much of central and southern Italy. As the British grew increasingly hostile to him, however, he knew that war was inevitable. In 1803, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French, a move designed in part to gain legitimacy and in part to enhance his prestige. The following year, war broke out with the British and their allies. Napoleon won a series of brilliant victories, culminating in the Battle of Austerlitz in December 1805. Here, he completely destroyed the Russian and Austrian armies, establishing his dominance over Europe. Following this, he went on to conquer much of Germany, as well as parts of Spain and Portugal. However, after invading Russia in 1812, his health started to decline. While the French army was victorious in battle, they lost many men, in particular through starvation and exposure. Furthermore, he developed a gastric illness that would trouble him for the rest of his life. By 1814, the French people were exhausted with the war, and Napoleon was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the island of Elba off the Tuscan coast. The following year, however, he escaped and returned to France, raising another army and fighting brilliantly once again, winning the Battle of Waterloo in June 1815. Shortly afterwards, however, he was forced to abdicate again and was exiled to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. Here, he spent his final years writing his memoirs, which were published posthumously. He died on May 5, 1821, possibly of stomach cancer, although there have been many other theories put forward, including arsenic poisoning, syphilis, AIDS, and even an alien microorganism. He was initially buried on St. Helena, but his remains were later transferred back to France in 1840 and are now interred in Les Invalides in Paris. Thanks for watching.